So we're going to look at some ideas for using your visualizer in English lessons. So we're going to cover a bit of spelling, phonics, and reading and writing. So one of the first things, and kind of the most obvious in many ways, is to be able to share books under the visualizer. So something like this, being able to share your book, which works well for the classroom so that children don't all have to try and crane their necks over to see the pictures, and also enables you to read the book without having to kind of turn it around and hold it up for the pictures, as they can see the pictures while you're reading along. And also works really well for being able to deliver online lessons where you need to, or hybrid lessons where you might have somebody watching from home, if not everybody watching from home. So you can share books without worrying about copying them and copyright issues and so on, because you're just going to share them as part of that live lesson through your visualizer. So that's one really easy way that you can use your visualizer regularly, is just putting anything you're reading out to the class in front of it so that they can see it too. Works also really well for any kind of non-fiction text you might want to put underneath and have a look through and point out things, and you might want to use a little pointer. Sometimes what I do as well is get things to kind of cover up certain words and see if they know what's going to be underneath. So what's that called, and so on. And you might also do things like covering up with a post-it note for rhyming words at the end of a page, and see if they know what word was going to be there, see if they can predict which rhyming word is underneath the post-it note, and so on. So it's a really good way of making those books a bit more interactive in an easier way than kind of holding them up or trying to prop them up in front of the children on the carpet. So it just makes it, especially if you don't have a carpet area, makes it really easy to share any books and text through that. My visualizer is quite low down because I don't have much space here. But if you have more space, then obviously you can have your visualizer high up and fit in more in the picture at a time. But you can see I'm a little bit restricted just by the fact that my visualizer is really close down to what I'm working on. So sharing written books is a really good idea. And also when you're going around the classroom during a lesson and you see some really good practice you want to share, or you see something that lots of people have got as a misconception, you can obviously put that under the visualizer and all discuss it. So rather than just reading out the work, you can actually look through it together, and you can do some live marking here if you wanted to look at where somebody's used a really good word and highlight that, and so on, and do any kind of marking in the lesson that you want to do. And if you don't want to pull up mistakes under the visualizer, because obviously there's a whole culture around sharing, and hopefully the children will get used to, being able to say, oh, can I use your book to just show everyone else because I think other people are making the same mistake or whatever. But if you think the child's not going to, is going to worry about that or feel embarrassed, one idea which also helps to start off lessons is to have your own exercise book for a lesson. And as the lesson gets started, put your book under the visualizer while the children are settling, and model writing the date and the title and underlining and writing the objective or whatever else you want them to do, and then starting the writing yourself so that they start to get a few ideas. And so those children who struggle to kind of get into the lesson at the beginning will see you modelling in your own exercise book. And then later, if you see any mistakes, what you can do is you can go back to your book and make a version of the same mistake, so that then you're sharing your mistake with the class and seeing if they can spot what you've done and correct it, which will hopefully then lead those other children who've done it to do their editing. So having your own exercise book is a really good way of being able to share the mistakes, and then you can use children's exercise books just to share all the great stuff and the good examples and best practice that they're doing. So then moving on to resources. Now, one of the things that I think is absolute best about visualizers is just being able to use all your physical resources that you've got around the classroom in a way that's more accessible, that shows the children modelling of how to use those concrete and physical resources, and also makes it really, really easy versus trying to make a whole smartboard or PowerPoint or Active Inspire presentation of kind of making pictorial versions of concrete resources. So one thing I always like to have nearby are these kind of magnetic letters, and these are really versatile, and they can, as long as you've got some around, and I've got a little, these are just from a cheap shop, a couple of pounds, and I've got like a bucket of all the letters, And sometimes I'll pick specific letters. So if we're working on a particular word ending, like ing, for example, I'll make sure that's in there. Or if we're looking at a particular prefix, or if we're looking at a particular digraph, so whatever we're kind of trying to focus on might be in there, or it might just be a mix. So up to year 5 and 6, it'll just be a mix of letters, and it's just a quick kind of 1 or 2 minutes, just being able to put some under the visualizer and then say, okay, who can come and make a word out of them? And then somebody might come up and make, for example, name. And then what I'll do is say, okay, can anyone change one letter and turn it into something else? So that's just a little added challenge. So then somebody might say, okay, I can change it to tame. And then say, okay, can anyone change one other letter and change it again? And so somebody might come up and change that to tape, and so on. So with just a few magnetic letters, you can keep replaying that and then just grab another handful of letters and start again, or that just fills a couple of minutes. So whether that's a starter for a lesson, or just when you've got a couple of minutes at the end of the day, or just before lunchtime when they're all ready to line up and so on, it's just a really good way of filling in a bit of time with some resources that you could just have readily available. Another one that's great for that is to always have a Boggle to hand. So Boggle, the game, if you don't know it, it's really easy in the sense that it's, you shake the dice, and then once they've laid down, you take the lid off. You can set a timer. So if it was year 6, for example, you might set a timer and see how many words they can make that are 3 letters or more within a minute or within 2 minutes. So just shaking it and putting it down is great. Or you can, again, you can just set the letters up yourself before the lesson if you want to have a specific letters in there, or specific groups of letters in there, so they're going to make specific words. And then lower down the school, what you can do with these is, if you buy some of those round stickers that you can get from WH Smith's and shops like that, you can stick on the top and turn these into lowercase letters, phonic sounds, add in the digraphs and everything else, and turn them into something a little bit different. But it's a really good way, again, of just having something ready, and suddenly you've got a whole 5 minutes of spelling practice at the beginning of a lesson, or when you've got 5 minutes later on during the day, that's ready made. You haven't had to spend half an hour making a PowerPoint with all of this on, or a smart notebook with all of this on. It's already ready to go, as long as you've got a Boggle to hand nearby. So I always have one of those around. Another resource that I always have are these, which have prefixes and suffixes and then your core word. And so I'll put some of those under the visualizer and ask if someone can come up and turn this into a word. So they might pick care and ing, for example, and then we'll talk about, okay, so how are you going to, what do you change to add that suffix on? So hopefully they will come up and write it without the E. And then I say, okay, and how about any others? So somebody might come up and do measuring, and then talk about, well, how do we change that when we write it out? And so we would model that. And then we might also say, okay, so now looking at these, are there any words you cannot make if you can you add any of these two together and it doesn't make a good word? So for example, careable. And then we've got some on the back as well, so we can switch those around. So again, these just came from I think these were from the early learn. No, they weren't even from the early learning centre. I think they were just from kind of the works, somewhere like that. So it's like a bucket of different word dominoes, they're called. So that's another one that's just a resource to hand. Now you might not have these exact resources, but hopefully what you're seeing here is that all I'm using is resources that I already have around the place. So again, I've got some Mrs. Wordsmith cards here for word of the day. So again, rather than all trying to crane to see that at the front, I can just show it under the visualizer, and then I can show the explanation there. Similar if you're doing phonics, it's showing that one there. So again, it's just all resources I've got. Now you wouldn't always necessarily need to show those under the visualizer, but it really depends on the space in your classroom. So it might be that that's really useful if you haven't got the kind of carpet area where you can share smaller resources, particularly without everyone kind of trying to squeeze in to see everything or gathering around to see everything. But again, particularly this, you can share your visualizer through your Zoom or Team or Google Meet session so that they can see it from home as well. Or if you're from home, you can then still do the lesson directly in if you've got somebody just looking after the class while you deliver the content of the lesson. So that's a few different English ideas. The last one I'll show you, which you won't see massively well because it's quite a small book. But I always have a crossword book to hand as well. And you can get crossword books that are specifically made for people who are visually impaired. So they're much larger print, essentially, which are really useful to go under the visualizer. This is quite a small one. This was kind of a stocking filler crossword book. But you can get these big crossword books. And then I really like with year 5 and 6 to just always have a crossword on the go. And so every time you've got a minute, they go, oh, can we do some more of the crossword? And then you just get out the book and see, and just all together try and work out some of these clues, focus on a particular clue, all figure out, talk about what it means and what they might be expecting and so on. So it's just a really good way of getting them to think about things like crosswords. You can also do the same with things like Sudoku and maths and so on. But again, it's just having things nearby that you can use without having to kind of do everything. You can see also that I've got a whiteboard underneath, so I like to have a whiteboard as my base, and then I can always write on what I'm doing as well, so I can add any kind of whiteboard markings and writings on there. So again, it's a lot easier than trying to write on the board, especially if you've got a board that isn't aligned most of the time, the ones that have kind of gone off drifting constantly. So actually you can do better handwriting underneath the visualizer on the whiteboard there, if you're just and you're able to kind of sit down and do that in front of the class and still be able to see the class without having your back to them as well. So that's lots of different uses for the visualizer in English lessons, which I hope is a bit of a buffet of ideas. Pick what you like, pick what you think is relevant to yourselves. There's another video on maths and there's another video on general ideas, and there's also some videos to look out for on how to share your visualizer for using Teams and Zoom and Meet. So do check those out as well. Thank you.